2 years after becoming the sole owner, Maria stood in her kitchen at 5 in the morning, preparing for what would be the most important day in her restaurant's history. A producer from a national cooking show had called the week before, saying they wanted to feature her restaurant in a segment about rising culinary talent in small American cities. The camera crew would arrive at noon to film during lunch service, then return for the dinner rush. They wanted to capture the authentic atmosphere of the restaurant and interview Maria about her journey from unemployed job seeker to successful restaurant owner. As Maria prepped vegetables and checked her mise en place, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 3 years ago, she had been desperate for any job that would pay her bills. Now she employed 8 people, served over 300 customers per week, and had a waiting list for her cooking classes that stretched 2 months into the future. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Regular customers brought their relatives from out of town to show off their local gem. Young couples had first dates at her tables and returned years later for anniversary dinners. Families celebrated birthdays, graduations, and other milestones in her dining room. But success had brought unexpected challenges. Managing 8 employees required different skills than cooking for customers. She had to handle personality conflicts, training issues, and the constant struggle of finding reliable staff in an industry known for high turnover. She had also discovered the lonely aspects of ownership. When she was an employee, she could share frustrations with coworkers or ask Tony for advice. Now, as the boss, she had to project confidence and make difficult decisions without showing uncertainty to her staff. The financial pressure was constant too. Every month brought bills for rent, utilities, insurance, and supplies. Equipment breakdowns, slow periods, and unexpected expenses could quickly eat into profits. She had learned to maintain careful cash flow projections and always keep enough reserves for emergencies. When the television crew arrived, Maria was nervous but tried to stay focused on what she did best, cooking great food. The producer, an energetic woman named Sarah, explained that they wanted to show her preparing several signature dishes while discussing her background and philosophy. "We're not looking for anything fancy," Sarah assured her. "Our viewers want to see authentic passion and skill. Just cook like you normally would and tell your story naturally." The filming went smoothly during lunch service. Maria prepared her grandmother's ragu, explaining how she had learned the recipe as a child and adapted it for the restaurant. She demonstrated her pasta-making technique, rolling dough into thin sheets and cutting perfect fettuccine by hand. Between takes, Sarah asked about her business philosophy and future plans. Maria found herself talking about food as a way to build community, about the satisfaction of training young cooks, and about her dream of eventually opening a culinary school for students who couldn't afford traditional programs. That dream had been growing in her mind for months. She regularly received requests from young people who wanted to learn cooking but couldn't afford culinary school tuition. She had been giving informal apprenticeships to several promising students, teaching them while they worked in her kitchen. "What if I could create a formal program?" she explained to Sarah. "Students could learn by working in a real restaurant environment, earning money while they develop skills. It would be more practical than classroom learning and more accessible than expensive culinary schools." The interview segment aired 6 weeks later on a popular morning show. Maria watched it at home with her mother, feeling surreal seeing herself on national television discussing her food and her vision for the future. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. The restaurant's phone started ringing constantly with reservation requests from people who had seen the show. Food bloggers and travel writers began visiting and writing reviews. Within a month, they were booked solid for dinner service and had to start taking reservations 2 weeks in advance. But the most meaningful response came from aspiring cooks around the country. Maria received dozens of emails and letters from young people asking about apprenticeship opportunities, sharing their own stories of wanting to learn professional cooking but lacking resources or opportunities. Reading these letters, Maria realized that her television appearance had given her a platform to address a problem much larger than her own restaurant. There were thousands of talented, motivated people who could become excellent cooks if given proper training and opportunity. She began researching how to create a formal apprenticeship program. She consulted with lawyers about legal requirements, talked to other restaurant owners about their experiences with training programs, and reached out to culinary educators about curriculum development. The process was complex and expensive, but Maria was determined to make it work. She applied for grants from foundations that supported workforce development and small business innovation. She partnered with the local community college to provide academic credit for practical training. After 8 months of planning and paperwork, Maria launched the Community Kitchen Apprenticeship Program. The first class consisted of 6 students who would spend 18 months working in her restaurant while receiving formal instruction in culinary techniques, food safety, nutrition, and business basics. The apprentices ranged in age from 18 to 35. Some were recent high school graduates who couldn't afford college. Others were adults changing careers after layoffs or life changes. What they shared was genuine passion for cooking and willingness to work hard to develop their skills. Training the apprentices required Maria to become a more formal educator. She developed lesson plans, created assessment rubrics, and learned to balance the needs of students with the practical demands of running a busy restaurant. The program attracted attention from other restaurant owners who wanted to implement similar initiatives. Maria found herself traveling to speak at industry conferences and consulting with other entrepreneurs about developing their own apprenticeship programs. These speaking engagements led to another unexpected opportunity. A publisher approached her about writing a cookbook that would combine recipes with her story and philosophy about food education. The book would target home cooks who wanted to develop more professional techniques and understanding. Writing the cookbook required Maria to analyze and articulate cooking knowledge that had become second nature. She had to explain not just how to make her signature dishes, but why certain techniques worked and how readers could adapt the principles to create their own variations. The book project also forced her to think systematically about her approach to teaching cooking. What were the fundamental skills that every cook needed to master? How could complex techniques be broken down into manageable steps? What were the most common mistakes that beginners made? And how could they be prevented? Working on the book in the early morning hours before the restaurant opened, Maria often thought about her grandmother, who had passed away before seeing her granddaughter's success. The old woman had planted the seeds of Maria's love for cooking, but she never could have imagined how far those seeds would grow. The cookbook was published 18 months later and became a surprise bestseller. Food magazines featured recipes from it. Cooking websites linked to her instructional videos, and bookstores struggled to keep it in stock. The book's success brought even more opportunities. Food Network offered her a regular spot as a guest expert on cooking technique segments. A major kitchen equipment manufacturer wanted her to endorse their products. Publishers approached her about writing additional books. But Maria was careful not to let external opportunities distract from her core mission. The restaurant remained her priority, and she was determined that growth wouldn't compromise the quality and community focus that had made her successful. She did accept selected opportunities that aligned with her values. She became a spokesperson for supporting local agriculture, using her platform to promote farmers markets and seasonal eating. She joined the board of a nonprofit that provided cooking education in underserved communities. Most importantly, she expanded the apprenticeship program to partner with restaurants in other cities. The model she had developed was being replicated by other passionate restaurant owners who shared her commitment to education and opportunity. 5 years after taking ownership of the restaurant, Maria employed 22 people across her various initiatives. The restaurant had earned recognition in national food magazines and guidebooks. Her apprenticeship program had graduated 38 students, most of whom had gone on to successful careers in professional kitchens. But the achievement that meant the most to her was less measurable. She had created something that contributed to her community in meaningful ways. Young people were learning skills that would support them throughout their careers. Families were gathering around tables to share good food and create memories. A neighborhood had a gathering place where people felt welcome and valued. Standing in her kitchen one evening, watching her current apprentices work alongside experienced cooks to prepare dinner for a full dining room, Maria felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting and meaningful. The work was still demanding. Restaurant ownership would always involve long hours, financial pressure, and constant problem solving. But It no longer felt like work in the traditional sense. It felt like expression of her truest self and her deepest values. She thought about that nervous young woman who had walked into Tony's restaurant years ago, desperate for any job that would pay the bills. That woman could never have imagined the life Maria was living now, not just the external success, but the internal fulfillment that came from knowing she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. The restaurant had given her more than a career. It had given her purpose, community, and a way to make a positive impact in the world. Every plate that left her kitchen carried not just good food, but care, attention, and the hope that it would bring someone joy. As the evening service wound down and her staff began closing procedures they had performed hundreds of times, Maria made her final rounds of the kitchen. She checked that all equipment was properly cleaned and turned off, reviewed the prep list for tomorrow, and made notes about menu items that might need adjustment. These quiet moments after service had become her favorite time of day. The kitchen was peaceful, the stress of service was over, and she could reflect on what had been accomplished and plan for what came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. There would be new apprentices to train, new dishes to develop, new problems to solve. The work would continue, as it had every day for the past 5 years and as it would for many years to come. But tonight, Maria allowed herself to feel pride in what she had built and gratitude for the unexpected path that had brought her here. A simple cooking job had indeed turned into something much more. It had turned into a life of purpose, creativity, and service that exceeded her wildest dreams. Maria wiped each 6 months into their partnership. Maria faced her first major crisis. It was a busy Saturday evening in December, and they had bookings for every table. The holiday season always brought their busiest crowds, with families celebrating and couples enjoying romantic dinners. Everything started normally. Maria was managing the kitchen with 2 other cooks, coordinating multiple orders while Tony worked the front of house. Then, disaster struck. The main gas line to their largest burner developed a leak, filling the kitchen with the dangerous smell of natural gas. "Everyone out," Maria shouted, immediately turning off all the gas valves and opening every window and door. They had 24 meals in various stages of preparation and a dining room full of hungry customers. But safety came first. Tony rushed into the kitchen when he smelled the gas. "How bad is it? We need to call the gas company immediately," Maria said, already pulling out her phone. "No cooking until this is fixed properly." The gas company technician arrived within an hour, but he delivered bad news. The leak was serious and would require extensive repairs. The kitchen would be shut down for at least 3 days, possibly a week. Maria watched Tony's face fall. 3 days without any revenue during their busiest season could put them in serious financial trouble. They had committed to holiday parties, anniversary dinners, and family celebrations. Canceling everything would damage their reputation and disappoint customers who had been planning special evenings. "What if we set up temporary cooking equipment?" Maria suggested. "I know a restaurant supply company that rents portable gas units. We could move operations to the back dining room temporarily." Tony looked doubtful. That would be expensive, and the city health department would need to approve any temporary setup. But Maria was already making phone calls. She contacted the health inspector she had gotten to know during routine visits, explained their situation, and scheduled an emergency inspection for the next morning. Then, she called the equipment rental company and arranged for portable burners, prep tables, and refrigeration units. Working through the night, Maria and Tony transformed their back dining room into a functional kitchen. It was cramped and challenging, but it was workable. The health inspector arrived early the next morning and, impressed by their thorough safety preparations, approved the temporary setup. When they reopened on Monday, Maria discovered that cooking in the makeshift kitchen required completely different strategies. Space was limited, so she had to streamline the menu to dishes that could be prepared efficiently in tight quarters. Communication with the waitstaff was more difficult because of the unusual layout. But something unexpected happened. Customers were fascinated by the temporary setup. They could see into the improvised kitchen and watch Maria and her team working. Several guests mentioned that seeing the cooking process made their dining experience more engaging and personal. It's like dinner theater, one customer told Tony. Watching the chef work is almost as entertaining as eating the food. Maria realized that the temporary arrangement had created an unintentional open kitchen concept. She had always been focused on the food itself, but now she saw how the theater of cooking could enhance the overall dining experience. When the regular kitchen was repaired and they moved back, Maria made a suggestion that surprised Tony. "What if we knocked out this wall?" she said, pointing to the barrier between the kitchen and main dining room. "We could create a partial open kitchen where customers can see some of the cooking action." Tony was hesitant. That would be expensive, and it would change the whole character of the restaurant. But the temporary setup had generated more positive customer feedback than anything they had done in years. After discussing it for weeks, they decided to hire a contractor for a consultation. The renovation took 2 months and required them to close completely for 3 weeks. It was a stressful time financially, but Maria used the closure to develop new menu items and refine their systems. When they reopened with the new open kitchen design, the response exceeded their expectations. Reservations increased immediately as word spread about the restaurant's transformation. Food bloggers started visiting and writing positive reviews about both the improved food and the engaging atmosphere. Maria found that cooking in view of the customers added a new dimension to her work. She became more conscious of her movements, developing an almost choreographed efficiency that was entertaining to watch. She also enjoyed the occasional interaction with curious diners who asked questions about techniques or ingredients. But the success brought new challenges. Higher visibility meant higher expectations. Every plate had to be perfect because customers could see exactly how it was prepared. The increased business required hiring additional staff and managing more complex logistics. Maria also discovered that she enjoyed training other cooks. Teaching someone to properly sear a piece of fish or explaining why certain flavor combinations worked gave her as much satisfaction as cooking itself. She began to think about the restaurant not just as a place to serve good food, but as a place where culinary knowledge and passion could be shared. One evening, a young man named David came in looking for work. He was fresh out of culinary school, but had no real restaurant experience. Something about his enthusiasm reminded Maria of herself when she first started. "Can you handle the pressure?" she asked him during his trial shift. "This isn't like cooking school. When we get busy, there's no time to think. You just have to react." David proved himself during his first weekend shift. When they got slammed with orders during the Saturday dinner rush, he kept up with the pace and maintained quality. More importantly, he showed the same passion for learning that Maria recognized in herself. Working with David made Maria realize how much she had grown. She was no longer the nervous beginner who had walked into Tony's kitchen 18 months earlier. She was becoming a leader, someone who could pass on knowledge and inspire others to improve their skills. The restaurant continued to evolve under Maria's influence. She started hosting special dinners featuring seasonal ingredients from local farms. These events allowed her to showcase more creative dishes while building relationships with suppliers who shared her commitment to quality. She also began teaching cooking classes on Sunday afternoons when the restaurant was closed. The classes started small, with just a few customers who had expressed interest in learning basic techniques. But word spread, and soon the classes were booking weeks in advance. Teaching forced Maria to articulate cooking knowledge that had become intuitive. Explaining to a student why you add pasta water to a sauce, or how to tell when bread dough has been kneaded enough, required her to think more deeply about the science behind techniques she had learned through repetition. These classes also connected her more deeply with the community. She got to know her customers beyond their dining preferences, learning about their families, their own cooking challenges, and their food memories. These relationships enriched her understanding of what food meant to people. One particularly meaningful class involved teaching a group of elderly residents from a nearby assisted living facility. Many of them had been accomplished home cooks in their younger years, but hadn't been able to cook in years due to physical limitations or living situations. Watching their faces light up as they kneaded bread dough or stirred risotto reminded Maria why she had fallen in love with cooking in the first place. Food wasn't just about nutrition or even pleasure. It was about memory, identity, and connection. That experience inspired her to start a monthly program where residents from the facility could come to the restaurant for hands-on cooking experiences adapted to their abilities. The program became so popular that other senior centers began asking if she could visit their facilities to teach simplified cooking classes. Tony watched these developments with pride and amazement. The quiet young woman he had hired had become not just an excellent cook, but a community leader and teacher. She had taken his small neighborhood restaurant and transformed it into something much larger, a place where food, learning, and community intersected. But Tony was also getting older and more tired. His wife had been asking him to retire for months, and he was finally ready to listen. The restaurant was in better shape than it had ever been, largely because of Maria's leadership and vision. One evening, after a particularly successful service, Tony asked Maria to join him in the office for a serious conversation. "I think it is time for me to step back completely," he said. "You don't need me anymore. Maybe you haven't needed me for months. This place, it has your vision now, your energy." Maria felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Taking full control of the restaurant was what she had been working toward, but the reality of complete responsibility was overwhelming. "I want to sell you my share," Tony continued. "We work out a payment plan that makes sense for both of us. You become the full owner, and I become your first customer." They spent the following weeks working out the details with lawyers and accountants. Maria would buy out Tony's ownership over 5 years, using the restaurant's profits to make payments. It was a generous arrangement that reflected Tony's confidence in her abilities and his desire to see the restaurant continue thriving. The transition was gradual. Tony reduced his hours slowly, letting Maria handle more of the business operations and administrative responsibilities. She learned about insurance, taxes, licensing, and all the other details that go into running a small business. The most challenging aspect wasn't the paperwork or financial management. It was the psychological shift from employee to owner. Every decision was now hers to make, and every consequence was hers to face. The responsibility was enormous, but it was also liberating. Maria began implementing changes she had been thinking about for months. She expanded the wine list to include more options from small, family-owned vineyards. She redesigned the menu layout to better showcase seasonal specials. She invested in higher quality ingredients, even though it meant smaller profit margins on some dishes. Most importantly, she started planning for the future. The restaurant's success had given her financial stability and confidence, but she was beginning to envision something even bigger. Maybe a second location, or a catering business, or a line of prepared sauces and seasonings. But first, she wanted to master what she had. Running one restaurant excellently seemed more important than expanding too quickly, and compromising quality sweat from her forehead as she stood outside the small restaurant on 5th Street. The paint on the door was chipped, and the windows needed cleaning, but the smell of garlic and herbs drifting from inside made her stomach growl. She had been unemployed for 3 months, and her savings were running dangerously low. This cooking position might not pay much, but it was better than nothing. The owner, Tony Benedetto, was a short man with flour-dusted hands and kind eyes. He had immigrated from Italy 20 years ago with nothing but a family recipe book and a dream. When Maria walked into his kitchen for the interview, she noticed how he moved with practiced ease, tasting sauces and adjusting seasonings without measuring anything. "You ever work in a real kitchen before?" Tony asked, watching as Maria nervously adjusted her hairnet. "Just at home," she admitted. "But I love cooking. I learned everything from my grandmother before she passed away." Tony nodded slowly. He had heard that story many times before. Young people came looking for work, claiming they could cook, but most of them lasted only a few days when they realized how hard restaurant work really was. The heat, the pressure, the long hours on your feet. It broke down even the strongest people. "Tell you what," Tony said, handing her an apron. "Show me what you can do with these ingredients." He pointed to a table covered with fresh tomatoes, basil, onions, and garlic. Maria took a deep breath and got to work. She had grown up in her grandmother's kitchen, watching the old woman create magic with simple ingredients. Her hands moved instinctively, chopping the onions with steady strokes, crushing the garlic with the flat side of her knife. As the onions sizzled in olive oil, Maria closed her eyes and remembered her grandmother's voice. Cook with your heart, Mija. The food will taste like whatever emotion you put into it. She had always thought those were just pretty words, but, standing in Tony's kitchen, she understood what her grandmother meant. The sauce she created was simple but perfect. Tony tasted it with a wooden spoon, his expression unreadable. Then, he smiled, the first genuine smile Maria had seen from him. You start tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock sharp, he said. The pay is not much, but you eat here every day, and I teach you real cooking. Maria's first week was brutal. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and she went home every night smelling like cooking oil and exhausted. Tony was a demanding boss who expected perfection even for the simplest tasks. He made her practice cutting vegetables until her knife work was flawless, taught her to taste everything multiple times, and showed her how to keep multiple dishes cooking at once without burning anything. In this business, timing is everything. Tony explained as he demonstrated how to coordinate 3 different pasta orders. You mess up the timing, you mess up the whole meal. But Maria was determined to learn. She arrived early every morning and stayed late, watching Tony work and asking questions about everything. She learned that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding how ingredients work together, how heat changed flavors, and how to adapt when something went wrong. The restaurant's regular customers began to notice improvements in their favorite dishes. Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for the chicken parmesan, mentioned that it tasted even better than usual. Mr. Rodriguez, who always ordered the seafood pasta, complimented Tony on the perfect texture of the shrimp. What they didn't know was that Maria had been preparing many of their meals. Tony had started letting her take on more responsibilities as her skills improved. She was no longer just chopping vegetables and washing dishes. She was actually cooking. One evening, a food critic from the local newspaper came in unannounced. Tony was dealing with a problem in the front of the restaurant when the order came back. Risotto with wild mushrooms, one of their most challenging dishes. Maria had made it dozens of times under Tony's supervision, but never completely on her own. Her hands shook slightly as she heated the pan and began toasting the rice. She added the warm stock one ladle at a time, stirring constantly and waiting for each addition to be absorbed before adding more. The mushrooms were sautéed separately with garlic and herbs, then folded into the creamy rice at the last moment. When Tony returned to the kitchen, the plate was ready to go out. He looked at Maria with surprise. You made this? She nodded, suddenly, worried that she had overstepped her boundaries. But Tony picked up a clean spoon and tasted the risotto. His eyes widened. This is perfect, he said quietly. Better than perfect. This is how my mother used to make it. The critic's review came out 3 days later. He praised the restaurant's authentic Italian flavors and specifically mentioned the exceptional risotto with wild mushrooms that transported him straight to a small trattoria in Tuscany. Tony framed the review and hung it on the wall, but he never told Maria that her dish had been the one to earn that praise. As weeks turned into months, Maria found herself taking on more complex preparations. She learned to make fresh pasta from scratch, rolling the dough until it was silky smooth and cutting it into perfect strands. She mastered the art of making bread, kneading the dough until it developed the right texture, and watching it rise in the warm kitchen. But more than learning techniques, she was discovering something about herself. In the chaos of the busy kitchen, during the dinner rush when orders came flying in and every second mattered, Maria felt alive in a way she had never experienced before. The stress that overwhelmed other people energized her. The pressure sharpened her focus rather than breaking it down. Tony noticed her transformation too. The shy, nervous young woman who had walked into his restaurant was becoming confident and skilled. She moved through the kitchen with growing authority, organizing her station efficiently and helping newer employees learn the basics. You have the gift, he told her one evening as they cleaned up after a particularly busy night. Some people, they can learn to cook. They can follow recipes and make good food. But you understand the soul of cooking. That cannot be taught. Maria wasn't sure what he meant at first, but gradually she began to understand. When she cooked, she wasn't just combining ingredients according to instructions. She was creating something that brought people joy, comfort, connection. Every plate that left the kitchen carried a piece of her care and attention. The restaurant was doing better business than it had in years. Word was spreading about the improved food quality, and they were booking reservations weeks in advance. Tony was able to hire another server and even gave everyone small raises. But Maria began to notice that Tony was slowing down. He had always been energetic and hands-on, but lately he seemed tired. He took longer breaks and sometimes let her handle entire services while he sat in his office doing paperwork. One afternoon, when the lunch rush was over and they were preparing for dinner, Tony called Maria into his small office behind the kitchen. "I want to talk to you about something important," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "I am getting old, and this work is getting harder for me. My wife, she wants me to retire, maybe move back to Italy to be near our grandchildren." Maria felt her heart sink. She had grown to love this job, this kitchen, this life she was building. The thought of losing it all made her realize how much it had come to mean to her. But Tony continued, "I do not want to just close the restaurant. This place, it means something to the neighborhood. The customers, they are like family. And you have made this place better than it ever was." He paused, studying her face carefully. "I want to offer you a partnership," he said finally. "You continue running the kitchen, learning the business side. I help when I can, but gradually you take over everything. What do you think?" Maria stared at him in shock. A partnership? 6 months ago, she had just been looking for any job to pay her bills. Now Tony was offering her a chance to help run the business. "I don't have money to invest," she said honestly. "I've been saving, but not nearly enough for something like this." Tony waved his hand dismissively. "Money is not everything. You have something more valuable. You have passion and skill and the respect of our customers. We work out the details later. What matters now is whether you want this life." Maria thought about her grandmother, who had always dreamed of owning her own restaurant, but never had the opportunity. She thought about the joy she felt when customers complimented her food, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and delicious from simple ingredients. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want this more than anything." Tony smiled and extended his hand to shake hers. "Then, we are partners. Now, let me teach you about inventory ordering and food costs. Running a kitchen is only half the battle." Over the following weeks, Maria threw herself into learning every aspect of the restaurant business. She studied the supplier relationships Tony had built over the years, learned how to calculate food costs and portion sizes, and began to understand the complex balance of running a profitable kitchen while maintaining quality. She also started experimenting with new dishes, carefully adding items to the menu that honored the restaurant's Italian traditions while showcasing her own creativity. A roasted vegetable lasagna with layers of grilled eggplant, zucchini, and bell peppers in a light bechamel sauce. Braised short ribs with polenta and gremolata that combined American comfort food with Italian techniques. Each new dish was tested thoroughly, first by Tony, then by trusted regular customers who provided honest feedback. Maria learned to take criticism constructively, adjusting recipes until they met her own high standards. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal too. Maria had always been somewhat timid, avoiding leadership roles and preferring to stay in the background. But running a kitchen required her to be decisive, to give clear directions, and to take responsibility for everything that happened during service. She found herself speaking up in ways she never had before, training new staff members with patience and firmness, handling difficult customers with diplomacy, and managing the complex logistics of busy dinner service with growing confidence. Her family noticed the changes too. Her mother, who had worried about Maria's lack of direction after college, was amazed by her daughter's newfound purpose and energy. Her friends were curious about her transformation from someone who seemed lost to someone who radiated passion and confidence. But the most significant change was internal. For the first time in her life, Maria felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The work was demanding and sometimes stressful, but it never felt like work in the traditional sense. It felt like she was expressing the most authentic part of herself.